Today I'm going to show you how I paint miniatures in a really simple, straightforward, basic way to make them tabletop ready for your tabletop role-playing games. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Black Magic Craft. I'm going to continue here on my Miniatures Basics series. We've been through all of the prep work, the priming, all of that stuff, and now it's time to put some paint on your minis. This video is for beginners. I'm gonna break this process down to its very basic, simplest form so that any rookie painter can spend a few hours, throw some paint on a mini, and it's gonna look awesome on the table. No mumbo jumbo, no complicated techniques, just the simplest way to paint a mini so that it's good enough for you to use for your game. Oh, there's so much more you should be doing or better. Doesn't matter. This is gonna be simple. I am going to be using the paints that I personally use, which happens to be mostly Reaper paints and some GW Citadel washes. That's what I use. You can use any miniature paints you guys would like. They're all gonna work just fine. Some people will be wondering, do I have to use expensive miniature paints or can I use craft paints? The answer is yes, absolutely. You can paint your miniatures with cheap acrylic craft paint. It'll work. It's just gonna be a lot harder and your results are probably not gonna be as good. The issue with cheap acrylic craft paint for miniatures is that the pigments are very big in those paints and you can't thin them down enough to do small detail easily like you can with miniature paints. Those are a lot higher density, smaller particulate, I believe, pigments, and they just work a lot better. So you can paint minis with cheap craft paint. It's just they're gonna often end up looking a little bit chalkier. It's gonna be harder to thin your paint. And if you're a new painter, it's gonna be even harder. That's the tricky thing, is that a veteran painter can use crappier paints and get a really good job. Someone starting out, they're gonna be fighting against the paint. So this is a case where I actually think it is worth it to pick up some good quality miniature paints. I'm gonna put links in the video description to every exact color that I use to paint this demonstration mini, so that you know exactly what I'm using. You will notice that these links take you to these paints on miniaturemarket.com, and that is because this video has been graciously sponsored and brought to you by the fine folks at Miniature Market. It is a great website where you can pick up pretty much everything you need for tabletop gaming. They sell everything from books, rule books, supplements, miniatures, terrain, board games, Magic the Gathering, everything. Their catalog of products is vast. And they offer free domestic shipping for all orders over $99. So if you need to pick up some minis, some D&D books, some paint, some board games, some Magic cards, whatever, they are a great place where you can do that. Where do we start? Let's demystify mini painting for a minute. There are tons of complicated techniques and tricks and ways to make miniatures look amazing. But if you just want to make something tabletop ready, it does not have to be that complicated. Essentially, it's just a few simple steps to take an unpainted mini to tabletop ready. And in order to get painting, you're gonna wanna have some kind of handle. This is something I forgot to mention in the previous prep videos, and some rookies have been asking, how do you do this? Well, basically it is just a cork. You can use a pill bottle, you can use a paint bottle, whatever. Stick that miniature to the top of it with some sticky tack or some poster tack, and then you have a nice handle that allows you to rotate and hold this thing while you're working on it. It will stop hand cramps, and it will also stop you from smudging the paint as you work. So get your mini on some kind of holder and go to town. The first thing you want to do is block out all of your colors. Just like a coloring book here, paint all of the different sections of the miniature in their basic color. And you're going to want to use shades of these colors that are brighter and more vibrant than what you want for the final result, because the washes are going to tone it down. Basically, go in, pick the largest section of the miniature, the thing that has the most of the same color, be it like the flesh tone or the armor or a robe or whatever and paint all that out. Get sloppy. Get it all over all the other sides. Don't be careful. Just get in there, be fast, paint the whole thing, because as you add the other colors, you can start cleaning up those lines. But there's no point trying to be meticulous on the first coat. And when I say first coat, that's the next important thing to keep in mind, is that you should be doing these colors in a few passes of thin paint. You're likely going to need to do 2 to 3 coats of every color, and that is normal and that is good. The thinner your paint is, the better it's going to look, because it's not going to gum up and get in all the little crevices and make it chalky and crappy. Use thin paint. The wet palette that I mentioned in a previous video is going to help you out with that quite a bit. Once you have all of the colors kind of blocked out, you can go in and go back and forth between the colors to kind of define the lines a little bit and clean up where you overbrushed. The nice thing about using the wet palette is that all your paints are going to be ready to go as you need them. They're not going to be dried out on a piece of paper. When you're doing things like armor and weapons, the easiest way to do this is just by using metallic paints. There are methods that you can paint out metal without metallic paints, non-metallic metals, but honestly, that's a lot of work, and that is some next level stuff that I don't even bother with. Just buy some metallic paints, paint out your armor with those. Keep it simple. Don't try to do 12 different shades of iron and copper and whatever. Just maybe make all your plate steel one kind of color and then some bronze or brass in some other spots, but you don't need to do 12 different shades of metal. You don't need to do 12 different shades of anything. Just keep it simple. Once all of your colors are blocked out and you've touched up the spots where you made mistakes, you can go in with a smaller brush and start picking out some of those small details, like the straps and belts and buckles and whatnot. On cheap minis, it can be sometimes hard to tell what these little details are, because sometimes they come out like potato quality. So a good trick is that if you have a mini and he's got some weird thing on him and you don't know what it is or what you're supposed to paint it, is that a finger or is that part of the sword? I don't know. Google image search the mini you are trying to paint. If it's a Reaper Bones mini, just Google search the code and you will come up with images of finished models that other people have painted. And looking at a few of these, you will then easily be able to see what this dang little detail is that you couldn't figure out. Also, it will show you that there is a vast variety of ways that you can paint these minis, and there's no right way or wrong way. Now it's time for the magic. The instant talent in a pot, the wash. Really good mini painters will not use this. They don't need to do it. They will do just varying shades of highlights and undertones and all that. But you're new or you're in a rush, use washes. They instantly will make your miniature look way better. It will define all of the little details. It'll get in the little crevices. It'll sharpen up the transitions between two colors by adding a little dark spot. It's great. For this, do not use the homemade wash that I use on terrain. It is not good enough for this purpose. You absolutely want to use some professional mini grade, well, I shouldn't say professional, but like some real mini grade washes made by real companies. They are far superior than a homemade wash for miniatures. I personally use the Citadel washes. I don't actually use the Reaper washes. I find they don't work quite as well. The Citadel ones are just amazing. They work so well. If you want to be really cheap and you only want to buy 1 or 2 washes, then get yourself some Nuln Oil. It's the black one. It will do 90% of everything. It looks good on almost everything. The only thing it's not great on is flesh tones, fairer flesh tones. So for that, there is a flesh shade that I like to use. If you are painting out skin tone that is of the Caucasian fairer variety, you want to use this flesh shade wash. That is hard to say, flesh shade wash. Wow. Put that on first, then do everything else in your black wash. If you want to get creative and start using different shades of brown and whatever, you can, but some black over everything is gonna make this piece look so much better. When doing this, don't go too crazy. Don't like overdo it with a ton of this stuff. You know, be light, go on, be somewhat careful. And then after everything's covered, use a damp brush to kind of wick away any spots where it's really created a heavy pool of this wash. If there's a little low crevice, all that wash will collect there and it will be too much. So just use a damp brush, put it in that wet wash and it will wick away and wipe it off and you'll be good to go. An important note too is that when you're applying the wash, don't use the brush that you've been recently using for a lot of other painting that might still have some pigments in it, because the wash is so liquidy, it will release this and make a murky, kind of not good result. Use a clean, dry brush when applying your wash. Once this wash has completely dried, and it's important that it's completely dried, you can move on to the highlight step if you want. Realistically, you could now take this mini and throw it on your table and use it and be done and it'd be fine. The problem with leaving it like this is that the wash looks great in all the crevices, but it kind of muddies up a lot of the high points that really shouldn't be dark. So if you want to take it up one step further and kind of really make this mini look finished off, what you want to do is start putting on some highlights. Basically, just take the color that you applied to block out the colors and reapply it on the highest ridges of the miniature. Don't cover up the crevices where the wash is, just hit those highlights, basically where light would hit it, but the easiest way is just to follow the highest points. This will start redefining the shapes on the miniature, and you will be amazed at how much this really cleans things up. The one spot on painting minis everyone will struggle with is the eyes. And there are tons of videos out there about just how to do eyes, and there's a lot of different techniques. This is my advice. If you have a really hard time doing it and you don't like doing it, then just don't. Don't paint eyes on your miniatures. Just let the wash go into the crevices. It's a small piece, who cares? It doesn't need eyes. But if you want eyes, the way that I do it is just by taking a very, very small brush, the smallest brush that I could find. I will paint out the whites of the eyes and I will overpaint this so that it's bigger than the actual eyeball. Then for the iris or the pupil, I will use a very, very small brush again, a tiny, tiny bit of black paint, and I will just paint on 2 little stripes. The important thing here is to try to keep these stripes looking in the same direction. If your miniature is looking one way, focused on something, put those stripes in a way that would make sense so you don't have googly eyeballs pointing in different directions. That's really what makes eyes look terrible, is when the eyes are looking in different directions. So 2 stripes focused in the same way. Then you'll have these crazy looking anime sort of eyes. What you want to do is go back in with your flesh shade that you've used, your color that you used to paint out the skin tone, and start painting in and defining those eyes till there's just a very tiny little bit of that eyeball showing. You may notice that this creates a bit of a problem if you've painted a fair skin tone and done like a reddish wash on it. If you go in and brush in and define those spots again, it can be too bright because it's not toned down with that wash. So don't be afraid to go in with a little bit more wash and get those crevices around the eye sockets. You will find in general that when you're doing this highlight step, it works really easily on things like cloth and robes and leather, and doing it on certain things like fair, lighter shades of skin tone, even some darker skin tones, that it can be hard to make it look natural. You just gotta play with it, practice with it, and eventually you will get the hang of it and it will start looking pretty decent. For basic tabletop ready minis, all you need to do is 1 highlight. If you want to put in a little bit more effort and take your miniature painting up a step further, you can add more highlight layers where you just lighten that shade a little bit by mixing white into it and bringing it a little bit higher and painting a little bit smaller of highlights, and start paying attention to where light would be coming from. And practice with that, play with that. You will find that it will enhance the look of your minis quite a bit, and it actually, for me, is kind of a really fun part because it's actually quite easy to do. But 1 base coat of color, a wash, and then a highlight is all you really need for tabletop ready. Done. especially if you're painting a whole bunch of minis at once. If you have a horde of goblins, just paint them the simple way. When the mini is totally painted out and you're happy with it, then you can go ahead and paint the base. And obviously this is going to be dependent on what you use to base it. If you did like a green stuff textured cobblestone or some dirt and sand or whatever, paint it the appropriate style that you would need. If it's just like kind of an earthy, like sand glued to the base, I usually just paint it out a dark brown, do a wash with either a black wash or an Agrax Earth Shades. And then once that's dry, I'll sometimes do a dry brushing of a very light kind of grayish tan to kind of pick out some little bits to look like stones. But that's really it. You can decorate the base with some flocking, some grass tufts, whatever you want. But the important thing is that you paint out the ring of the base. The thing that really finishes the piece off is to redefine that nice edge of your miniature base. I personally like to paint mine out black because I like that really sharp framed border. You can opt to paint it a more toned down color to match the base. If you have a grassy base, you can paint that ring green. If it's a sandy one, you can paint it a kind of sand tone. Do whatever you want, but just do something to clean it up and define that edge and really finish things off. At this point, your mini is done, it's tabletop ready. You may want to put a protective coating on it for a couple reasons. One is because these miniatures will be handled quite a bit, so protective coating will help seal in the paint. But also the washes that you use will sometimes leave a mini looking really shiny, which you may not want. So a clear coat of a matte finish will help dull that down. You all know that when I do my terrain, I seal the pieces with Minwax polyurethane. I don't use that on miniatures, and the reason I don't use it is because polyurethane over time has a tendency to yellow. And when doing terrain, if you're doing rocks and castles and wood huts and whatever, a slight bit of yellowing is barely going to be noticeable. I mean, to the point where I've looked at pieces I made 2 years later to try to see if they've yellowed, and I think this looks a little bit yellow. Did it yellow, or is that how I painted it? I don't know, because it blends in and it works. But if you spend a lot of time painting a beautiful miniature, you don't want that to yellow. That could look weird, especially on certain colors. So I recommend using something different. Myself, I use this Krylon clear coat. It's like an artist one. I think it's actually meant for varnishing paintings, maybe? I don't know. I use it because it doesn't seem to yellow at all. And there's other brands that you can use that are fine too. This is just what I happen to use. One note though is that I have a gloss and I have a matte. And the reason for that is I want my final coat to be a matte. I used to like my minis looking a little bit glossy. Now I've finally come over to what everyone else thinks and prefer a bit of a matte look. The thing about matte clear coats is they're not as durable and not as strong as gloss coats. So it is common practice in miniature spraying, just like in furniture or any kind of carpentry, if you are gonna finish with a matte coat, start with coats of gloss. Build up the stronger, more protective layers of gloss first, and then do a final coat in matte to dull the sheen. That's just the way clear coats work. Glosses are stronger. So you can do that. Another clear coat that people swear by is the Testors Dull Coat. I think that would be the industry kind of standard for clear coats. So you definitely can't go wrong with that. I've never used it, but so many people swear by it that I am sure it is amazing. Obviously, you can spend your entire life learning crazy techniques to paint minis. This is just the tip of the iceberg. This is just enough to get you going. And honestly, it is more than enough to play a game of D&D. So don't be intimidated by it. Just try it out. Get some mini paints. Paint up some minis using these simple steps and just go nuts. If you need to pick up any paints or miniatures to try this out for yourself, I suggest you try out miniaturemarket.com. Again, they are a fantastic place to buy stuff for this hobby, and they have graciously sponsored this video. I'm gonna put links in the video description to all the colors that I used and the miniature that I painted, so you can click on those, get what you need. Thanks again to Miniature Market for sponsoring this video. I hope you guys found this video useful. If you did, hit that like button and drop me a comment below. Of course, if you need to pick up any other terrain building supplies, you can head over to blackmagiccraft.ca. There I have my essential equipment store with all of the stuff that I use and recommend. If you love these videos and you want to help me keep making them, the best way you can do that is by supporting Blackmagic Craft on Patreon. Those funds are crucial to allowing me to continue making these videos, and I need that support, and I thank everybody who has been already supporting the channel for so long on Patreon. It is so much appreciated. Love you guys, and to all of you that are on the fence about it, check out the page. I'd love to have you as the newest member of the Blackmagic Craft Fellowship. That's it for this week, guys. I hope this helps you out. Until next week, cheers and happy crafting, or happy mini painting. Happy gaming. Peace.